Alright guys, so this is part 2 of the Groomsmen Sword build, series of videos that I'm making. Y'all requested some longer, more in-depth videos, so hopefully you guys are liking them so far. The first one was I think about 30-35 minutes, but I did cover in that one overall concept and design of the swords, originally in CAD, and then brought that into the laser program, programmed those to be cut, and then brought it into Photoshop to figure out the overall color scheme, as well as where and how, a basic guideline of how the grinds are going to go, down the spine of the sword and everything like that. So, at the end of that video, I showed me getting the parts back from my work, Liquid Metal Concepts. They're all out, great. I know I've talked about them before, but they're all out fabrication shop. They do have a high wattage laser, which is what they can cut steel up to, I think, 1/2 inch thick. But yeah, ended up getting those parts back. This video is going to be covering from that point forward as far as, milling out the hardware holes to accept all the screws to hold everything together, to basically taking all the finish off. When you get steel, because I made all this from hot rolled steel, from the mill, there's a mill scale on that steel that needs to be removed. It can be removed, abrasion-wise with like an orbital sander and sandpaper, or some people use a flat disc on an angle grinder. Both those ways, they leave a lot of scratches. It's pretty aggressive to remove that scale, without being damaging. But in this video, I'll cover the way I do it. It's a great way, even if you have steel that is rusted, submerge it in white vinegar, leave it outside in the sun, out in the heat for a day, come back the next day and it wipes right off. So that'll be covered in this video, but yeah, hopefully you guys are liking them. I'll get the next one out as soon as I can. I'm about to finish my forge build video, so that will be out very soon. Kind of stoked about that. But hopefully you guys are liking these longer videos. From an editing standpoint, it is a little bit more time consuming to edit multiple videos, for one build, half hour to 40 minutes long. But I'm digging it. It lets me, talk a little bit more in depth. If you guys have questions, always let me know. And without further ado, I guess we'll just jump into part 2. So let me know what you think. All right. So from the end of the first video, this is where we left off. These are the parts that I got back from my work, Liquid Metal Concepts. Everything's cut out. Looks real good. All the parts fit inside each other, and that's definitely a plus. As far as the laser goes, it will need, cleanup as far as deburring and things like that. So that's where we're gonna go ahead and start off with cleaning up basically the back and the sides of the cuts. So here I am on the TW90 belt grinder, and just removing the burrs left on the back of the part. There's multiple ways to get parts made out of metal. If even from an angle grinder and metal cutoff wheels to wire EDM, CNC, water jet cut, laser cut. Laser cut's definitely the way I like to go. Water jet is not bad. It does leave a pretty sandblasted finish on the cut edges, whereas the laser leaves a nice shiny, smoother cut edge. As well, the time to produce a part on the lasers 10 times quicker than a CNC or water jet. Wire EDM can be a very, very intricate cut. Hold really, really tight tolerances. But as far as what I'm going for, something like that, the price point, the time, and all that, the accuracy isn't needed. And even on some parts, I'll cut, like with the mini cleaver, the handles on that. I went ahead and cut those with an angle grinder, and then went ahead and shaped them on the TW90. Excuse me. But yeah, it's a pretty mundane process, especially with so many parts. 2 of each part per each sword. One for the front, one for the back.
you know, times the 5 swords. But it's definitely a necessary step. You know, water jets don't leave, you know, that much of a burr on the back of the part. These are basically created from the high temperatures of the laser cutting, because basically what it's doing is cutting the steel with really tight, you know, tiny beam of a lot of generated heat. But you know, in effect, it does leave a little bit of melted metal. But, you know, it's not too hard of a process to do. There's a little close-up. See how there's little pieces of slag is what we call it. Just hit it on there and cleans right off. You know, for it being on the back of the part, it's not too concerning. There's the burrs on the side. It's not too concerning with it, you know, looking very good. You know, these are the parts of the well, parts that you don't see. The bottoms is essentially what gets sandwiched against the blade. You know, as far as the face of the parts, that would definitely be a different story. I wouldn't want to, you know, deburr in this type of fashion. There we go, just clean up the edges on those. You know, there's no real science to it. You know, I use it's a heavy grit belt, but it's an older one that's been used. So, you know, you want enough grit on that belt to be able to take it off in a timely fashion. You don't want to be sitting there with a really fine belt trying to sand off, you know, molten metal. Here's a little close-up of everything cleaned up. Now on to the next parts. So like I said, you know, a lot of people are wanting a more in-depth video, kind of see how the process goes, a little bit more explanation. This is just a pretty cut and dry step in the process. You know, cleaning up parts, making sure they're, you know, looking good. Something you want to work with, want to put out there, you know, a product that, you know, an end product that looks good. And with so many parts, it's a good time to, you know, put on tunes and just kind of get through it. Gets to be pretty pretty repetitive. But we'll be on to the next step here pretty quick. You know, I did speed up, you know, all these videos about 500%. You know, a lot of people were saying that the 5,000% speed in the fantasy sword build was a bit too fast. But the real time on this, you know, we'd be sitting here for hours watching me go through and deburr and clean up. Which, if that's a video you guys want to watch, man, there will be like a 30-part video for this. Alright, so here we go. We got some cutting oil. Gonna put that on the holes and on the drill bit. And this next step is basically for all my hardware that's gonna hold all the parts together. I've got aluminum spacers that will be sitting in the holes of the blade itself. And all these parts are going to attach with basically not necessarily countersunk, but screws that have been obviously stepped down, milled in. And there we go, making sure that test fits, goes deep enough. The last thing I want is for the screws to sit too proud. I like them either, you know, exactly flush with the face of the material, or, you know, just just below. And that cutting oil, I want to say I got that probably 7 or 8 years ago, maybe even longer at Harbor Freight. It's a cutting oil that actually foams up. A lot of cutting oils that I've used in the past is really just, you know, what you think of as oil. It's just a a watered down substance, you know, with a little bit of viscosity to it. That you know, that foams up, just I like it a lot more. It gets in the crevices I want it to, and it doesn't drip and leak as bad, get all over the parts. You know, typical cutting oil, the whole drill press would be saturated by this point, you know, just after a couple holes. But yeah, again, this is just regular 836 hot rolled steel. We've got a typical, I believe they're Milwaukee brand drill bits, carbide tip, or just carbide, not necessarily tipped. I believe they're carbide coated. So, you know, when you're working with aluminum, it works great. With hot rolled steel, works almost just as good. And just cruising through. You know, this particular drill press itself, it's a Harbor Freight as well. There's some tools, some machinery that I will get away with going on the you know, more cost-effective route, just because the price point's nice, and the tolerance isn't you know, the tolerances that I'm working with are more than just fine, you know, with a drill press like this. Not to say that I wouldn't love to have a nice big beefy one. You know, right now with the production that I do, this has been just fine. You know, the TW90, the belt grinder, that was definitely something. I believe it was about $3,200. That was something that, you know, was investment, but I knew was an investment that was needed. You know, you kind of play around with knowing what tools, you know, you can get away with going a little bit more cost effective, and what tools that you actually need to spend a little bit of money on. You know, anything to help you do, you know, your job or production, you know, whatever you're making, just a bit easier, a bit more effective. You know, like I said, this is a pretty fun process to do. You know, just get in your groove, put the tunes on, you know, just kind of get into the zone what you're doing. You know, each one of these steps is definitely a good way to do large production, you know, runs of stuff. You know, setting aside enough time is definitely what I like to do. You know, rather than set up a machine, you know, get all the parts going, and then stop, and then come back a few hours or even a few days later. It's something that I'll set aside enough time that I know, you know, hey, let's set the machine up, have this time set aside, and then, you know, just crank right on through, you know, get in the groove, repeat the process. That way there's no variables that could happen in between, forget what I'm doing, machine may have gotten bumped or nudged. You know, on these parts I do have a part stop for the drill press. So basically any depth that I go to, or any material that I have, you know, under that drill bit itself, it's going to go to that same depth and it will stop itself, which is how it's so easy to, you know, repeat, you know, part after part the same depth without having to measure and gauge every time, make sure I'm going the right depth, or, you know, not going too deep or going too shallow. You know, all these parts right here that I've been doing, they're 1/4 inch thick. The bits of the handle, the accent pieces on the outside, they're 3/16 thick. So once I start doing those, this depth stop, this will just be consistent throughout. You know, whatever material goes underneath there, thicker or thinner, it'll still stop at that same depth. So I'll know those screws are, you know, coming out the backside the exact, you know, distance I need, and it will be consistent throughout the whole run. But, you know, Harbor Freight drill press, great way to go. You know, like I said, if there's any other way that you can do things, you know, faster, more productive, you know, without making things harder on yourself, I say go for it. You know, just like the white vinegar. You know, if there's a process you can do that, you know, it may take, you know, a day's worth of time to sit and wait. You know, it might save you in the long end. You know, that saves you sandpaper, you know, having to get an angle grinder and get flap discs, and then, you know, clean up all the scratches that have been made or any gouges that may have been made on the face of the material. You know, I mean, welders have no problem using flap discs to clean up whatever, you know, messes they make. And sometimes projects like that, it doesn't matter. So that might be the way to go. But you know, this Harbor Freight drill press, it's got the tolerances I need, and it's cost effective. And, you know, this thing's been, you know, years, probably 7-8 years I've had this thing. And, you know, just as long as I've had that cutting oil. And if anything ever happens to it, you know, $35-$40, go grab another one and get another 7, 8, 10 years out of it. And here's those 3/16 parts. And I think I just cut the video because I couldn't find any other footage. So I did the first one, and for some reason I stopped recording. And yeah, so here's the next step. We're doing simple green, because essentially at this point the parts are covered in cutting oil and metal chips, metal flakes. You know, if it was just a couple parts, you know, I'd probably just use acetone, clean it all off. But it's such a big batch, I figured, you know, dump it into the simple green, let it sit for about an hour, I think about an hour, hour and a half. You know, it doesn't take too long. And then come back at it and scrub off each one. Make sure the oil's gone, make sure all the little metal bits are off. You know, because the next step that I'm hopping to is that white vinegar. And I definitely want to make sure that there's no oil residue left on the parts. Otherwise it would, you know, it would hinder the vinegar from doing its job. But really it's just, you know, scrubbing each one off. After I get done with all of these, I'll take it over to the sink and fill it with water, slosh it around, dump it out. Just make sure the simple green's nice and cleaned off. Just a way to streamline the process. Alright, so here we are after cleaning them off with water, and just going to fill this up with white vinegar. Just enough to submerge the parts. So there's the black mill scale, just kind of a before shot to know what they look like before. And I'm going to go ahead and wrap this with plastic wrap. I found out the hard way that if you let this sit out in the heat, in the sun, and you're not keeping the condensation from evaporating, it will evaporate out and it will leave you with a bunch of dry, rusty parts. Which is not a good day. First time doing that, my heart just dropped. I was like, oh man. But, you know, again, you fill it back up with white vinegar and, you know, it'll take that rust right off. So, and it's, you know, being in Arizona, the heat, the sun, it helps accelerate the process. And, you know, white vinegar is not too expensive to buy. So a couple gallons goes a long way. You know, it's reusable. As far as, you know, the white vinegar from the swords, from the small parts, you'll see. You can reuse it. It's just a little nasty to look at. But again, just sealing it up. Want to keep all those, you know, all the vapors in there. I want to keep all the condensation from evaporating out. So try and get it as airtight as you can. And there it is, leaving it there, and pop the lid on, and let it sit for a day. It's a really fun hack. It's almost magical. The next day you come, you're like, oh man, this looks nasty. It's like the bog of eternal stench. Which doesn't smell that bad, you know. It still smells like vinegar. It just looks like death. But, you know, you pull the parts out, and that mill scale, it just wipes right off, you know, like magic. Just gone. And again, if you have a rusty part, same exact thing. The rust will wipe right off. If you've got heavy pitting, like if you've got a part that's been rusted for years, it will leave pits. But, yeah, that's a great little hack to do. There we go. You know, after this, you'll want to wipe it all off. You know, rinse it with water. But if you're doing a large batch of parts like this, you won't want to take them all out at once and rinse them all out with water, because at this point that mill scale is gone and there's no protection on the steel, and it will rust. So one by one, take the parts out, you know, wash them with water and dry them off one by one. So here's the next step, my trusty Magnum Sharpie. You know, I've got a jug of Dyka Blue, which is you know, what machinists use to mark their scribe lines or scribe their marking lines. But you know, every time I've used it, no matter how long I let it dry, it seems to just flake off, and I'm left without a reference line. And the Sharpie, you know, it just some acetone when you're done. If there's any, you know, left on parts you haven't machined off, the acetone will take it right off. So I'm not too worried about that. You know, the Sharpie's been a lifesaver for me. It's great, you know, black contrast to the silver scribe lines that I can see. It doesn't chip away, it doesn't wash off. You know, I know there's people out there that are gonna jump me for using calipers to scribe the lines, but you know what? These calipers, again, like I said, you know, they're from Harbor Freight. They're cost effective. You know, I've had these things for probably 7, 8, 10 years too, and probably the battery that it came with, or at least the backup battery that was in the box that it came with. I know I've never had to buy a battery for these calipers ever. And you know, with the tolerances that I'm working for, it's enough for me to have, you know, basic guidelines. And it's you know, everyone's got their way of doing stuff. It's just my way. Found it to be pretty consistent. So basically, I've marked out my my edge grind and my hollow grind from where the middle is to where the hollow grind should stop. And here comes the mundane part of marking the sides of these parts. You know, unlike the blade where I mark the face of the material, I'm actually marking the sides of the parts. Because on the blade I'm looking for where I'm going to have that, you know, the edge grind and the hollow grind. For these, I kind of just play around with and toy with the grinds on the face of the material, but this line that I'm going to do on the side, that's essentially my depth. So I know whatever angle I set, I don't want to go any deeper than the lines that I've scribed. And there's the faster way of getting them done. And I'm going about, yeah, I think I vary between each of the parts as far as what depth I'm going to scribe to. Because, you know, like I said, the 3/16 parts, they're thinner and they're going to be on the outside of the handles. So, a little hard to see, but you can see each one's got their scribe lines marked. Different varying depths. But that's essentially going to conclude where we're at on this video. The next video is the fun part where I get to actually, you know, play around with grinds and facets and make stuff look kind of shiny and pretty and cool. So I appreciate you guys sticking around for this video, and catch you on the next one.